Well, here it is, Phanteks' latest mini-itx case, the Evolve Shift XT. Now, in case you didn't watch Phanteks' launch video, what's special about this case is the ability for the user to adapt the case between 3 sizes depending on cooling needs. It's pretty industrial looking, but minimalistic at the same time. I really like it. I mean, it's not the cleanest looking case I've seen or reviewed, but I don't think it's meant to be, and I dig that. There's 2 color options, satin black, which is what I have here, and galaxy silver. It's got a steel chassis with hybrid mesh/vented aluminum panels and a tempered glass infinity mirror at the front with some RGB lighting hidden behind it. Front panel I/O on the left side is nice and minimal with a single USB 3.1 Gen 2 Type-C port and a single USB 3.0. On the right side, we've got RGB mode and color buttons. What's really neat though is this sliding panel with the power button built in that covers up everything, keeping the front looking nice and clean. And its smallest configuration at 13.5 liters, you can fit air coolers at up to 72 millimeters tall. In its Air Boost configuration at 15.6 liters, the chassis gets raised by 30 millimeters, allowing for a couple of 120 or 140 millimeter case fans at the top. And in its liquid-cooled configuration at 17.4 liters, the chassis gets raised by 60 millimeters, so you can stuff in a 240 mil radiator at the top with a couple of 120 mil fans. In all 3 configurations, though, you can fit a full-size 3-slot GPU at up to 324 mils long, so you're not limited on GPU size just because you wanted to go for one of the smaller case configurations. For some perspective, here's what it looks like in its smallest form sitting next to the box for the Phanteks cooler they sent me to use for this build. Could almost fit. Now, real quickly, you don't get much in the accessory box, so there's a bag with a bunch of screws, some zip ties, a couple of rear covers, a riser cable lock, and a small screwdriver for some of those tight spots. There's also this user manual with some pretty good cable management and installation tips and some mesh dust filters for the top panel that come in the box with the case, but I probably won't be using those. Now, to open the case, you pop off the magnetic front half panel at the top, push these 2 locks inward, and then slide the top panel to the front and pull up. After that, you can pull out the mesh panels, remove the thumb screw from the bottom at the rear, and then just lift the whole chassis right out. It's a bit cumbersome, but it all comes apart pretty fast, and now you've got a lot more access to the build than most ITX cases provide. Pre-installed in the case is a removable 2.5-inch SSD bracket and a pretty heavy-duty Gen 4 PCIe riser cable. The removable radiator bracket's on hinges, which is awesome, because it's handy for installation, but also for if and when you need to work on your system in the future. Now, getting into the build, after tossing in the motherboard, the installation guide recommends connecting all the motherboard cables before anything else for better cable management later in the build process. I did connect some, but most others I didn't think made sense to connect this early into the build. Now, after throwing in all the cables I wanted, the power supply was up next. For this build, I'll be using Phanteks' new Revolt 750 watt fully modular 80 plus platinum SFX PSU. It's a really nice, well-built quality PSU made by Seasonic, so we can trust that it'll work great. Unfortunately, instead of some nice and flexible fabric braided cables, it comes with a bag of those super rigid standard plastic housing cables, which are a lot harder to work with in mini-itx builds. Anyways, after the PSU, the guide recommends to install the GPU next. I'm guessing this is so that you don't have to deal with lifting the radiator out of the way if it's already mounted. Now, unfortunately, I'm still having an impossible time trying to acquire a full-size 3-fan GPU without paying absolutely ludicrous prices. So for this build, like all my past ITX builds, I'll be using the MSI Ventus 2X RTX 3070. Next, we're supposed to start mounting the radiator and fans, but I decided this would actually be a good point to start connecting and cable managing everything. And like every mini-itx build, dealing with the cables is always the biggest challenge, and the Shift XT is no different. But somehow Phanteks made a case that I could actually neatly tuck away the insanity. In fact, there's even a bit more space under the GPU if you really needed it, and even more if you didn't need to use the SSD bracket. Okay, so with that finally dealt with, I moved on to mounting the fans and radiator, which installed nice and easy, but after mounting the pump, the tubes wanted to pop out the side, so I opted to use a zip tie through one of the handy dandy zip tie cutouts, and then just tuck the tubes flat against the underside of the radiator bracket, which fit perfectly and doesn't block either of the fans. So anyways, with everything mounted and ready to go, here's one last look at the build. Now, because I went with the liquid-cooled configuration, we've got to adjust the top panel to fit the radiator and fans, which is done really easily by simply moving these little height set screws to the 3rd position, which is where that little screwdriver comes in handy, and also mounting the largest of the 2 rear covers to the rear of the top panel. Anyways, here it is all buttoned up. Now, unless most of your parts have some RGB lighting, you're not going to be seeing much, and maybe that's what you're going after. But personally, depending on which side of the desk you'll have it on, I still think some RGB on the GPU or RAM and cooler pump glowing through the mesh panels and ventilation would look pretty cool. But at the very least, you've still got that RGB infinity mirror to match your desk theme or mood for the day. Now, testing thermals with an hour of Beta 64, temperatures are better than other mini-itx cases I've reviewed in the past, like the Lee & Lee Q58 and iQNX ZX1. But not by much. So if you're planning an air-cooled build in this case, I'd suggest being extra mindful of the parts you're picking and the kind of performance you're looking to achieve. Personally, I think cooling could have been much better if the internal layout wasn't split. So like if it was reconfigured so the GPU was horizontally mounted and there was a side panel mounting bracket for a couple more case fans, or maybe even a side panel mounted radiator with a couple of case fans as exhaust at the top, we'd see dramatically better thermals. And I don't think the shape or size of the case would change that much, if at all. But then again, I'm not an engineer, so what the hell do I know? But other than that, my only real complaint is the sliding front I/O panel. You need two hands to slide it up, because if you try and push up on just one side, you're putting leverage on just one side of the tracks, so it won't budge. Like, you could try and push up underneath the power button, but then you're either actually pressing the power button or putting a lot of upward stress on the button mechanism, and that's no good. But I think most people will probably just leave it open. It's just a little annoyance I thought you'd want to be aware of. But yeah, I think it's a neat little ITX case. Certainly has a cool look to it. I wouldn't load it up with the best performance parts on the market and expect the temperatures those parts produce to do you any favors, but you could still definitely get away with a reasonably high performance gaming PC with acceptable thermals. At least better than any of the other ITX cases I've reviewed. And for $170 US with high quality PCIe Gen 4 riser cables costing like 60 to 80 bucks, not to mention all the aluminum plus machining, I'd say it's pretty competitively priced. Anyways, I think that's gonna do it for this one. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all in the next one. Cheers.